A little girl alone at the airport whispers, "My mom's in heaven." When a stranger in a blue suit steps in to help, their lives collide in a way that changes everything. The airport was bathed in the pale, sleepless light of early morning. Lines of weary travelers dragged suitcases across the polished floor, the hum of announcements blending with the distant echo of rolling wheels. Among them stood a little girl, small, fragile, her blonde hair tangled by the wind from the automatic doors that opened and closed behind her. She looked too young to be alone, barely 6 or 7, dressed in a white cotton dress and a faded denim jacket that seemed a size too big. On her back was a tiny pink backpack with a peeling unicorn patch, the sort that once sparkled when new but now carried the dull sheen of overuse. She walked up to the check-in counter, standing on her toes to reach the edge of it. The woman behind the desk glanced down with polite confusion, the kind reserved for odd or inconvenient situations. "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" she asked gently. The girl clutched the strap of her backpack and looked up with those impossibly clear blue eyes. "I need to fly to my aunt," she said, her voice steady but quiet, like she was reciting something she had practiced. The woman frowned slightly. "Do you have a ticket? Or maybe your parents' passports?" The girl shook her head, and her lower lip trembled just a little. "My mom, she won't wake up anymore," she whispered. "She's in heaven." The words fell into the air like glass breaking in slow motion. For a second, no one moved. The clerk's hand froze above the keyboard. The man next in line turned his head, pretending not to listen, but his face betrayed discomfort. The hum of the airport seemed to fade, replaced by a single, unbearable silence. The woman behind the counter tried to smile, though her voice wavered. "Honey, are you saying your mother is gone?" The little girl nodded, still calm, still too composed for her age. Her fingers tightened around a folded piece of paper, a crumpled note with a name written in uneven handwriting, "Aunt Mary, by the sea." She placed it on the counter like proof of her mission. The clerk swallowed, her training suddenly useless in the face of this fragile reality. She reached for the phone, whispering to her colleague, "We need security. Maybe child services." But before she could dial, a man's voice interrupted from behind. Deep, firm, yet strangely gentle. "Don't call them. I'll handle this." The woman turned, startled. The man who stepped forward seemed out of place in the chaos, tall, sharply dressed in a navy suit, dark hair brushed back, blue eyes that reflected both authority and weariness. People recognized the type instantly: powerful, self-contained, the kind of man who moved through the world without being questioned. He crouched down to meet the little girl's eyes. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lily," she said. "I have to go to my aunt. She lives by the sea. My mom told me to." Something flickered in his expression, not pity, but something heavier, older. He didn't know her, and yet the sight of her stirred a pain he thought he had buried long ago. Around them, the airport carried on, luggage carts rolled, boarding calls echoed, but for a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. The girl, the note, the voice that trembled as she said heaven, it all pulled at him in a way that words could not explain. The clerk hesitated, her hand still hovering over the phone. "Sir, do you know this child?" she asked. He looked up slowly, his tone even. "Not yet," he said. "But I think I'm supposed to." And as the world around them returned to motion, the man and the girl stood there, strangers bound by chance, both unknowingly stepping into the beginning of something that would change them forever. Ethan Rivers had not planned to be at the airport that morning. His assistant had booked the flight for a last-minute meeting in Seattle, and he had considered canceling it twice before forcing himself out of bed. The mornings were always the worst. They were the quiet hours when the world was too still, when he could hear his thoughts echoing in the empty spaces of his apartment. Even now, months after the accident, he still woke expecting to hear laughter from the kitchen or the quick patter of his son's feet racing down the hallway. But the silence always returned, swallowing everything that had once made sense. He was a man known for power, the kind of power that came with polished shoes, confident handshakes, and a voice that could silence a boardroom. His face appeared on magazine covers, his name attached to foundations and mergers, and yet the world he had built no longer held meaning. The blue of his eyes, once sharp with ambition, had faded into something distant, like light seen through fog. People still called him brilliant, successful, untouchable. None of them saw the ghost that lived behind his calm expression. When he heard the little girl's voice at the counter, that trembling insistence, "I need to fly to my aunt," something inside him paused. At first, it was curiosity. Then it was recognition, though he couldn't explain why. He had been watching from a few feet away, distracted by his phone, when the words, "My mom won't wake up anymore," reached him. They cut through the noise of the airport with an intimacy that made his chest tighten. He turned, and there she was, a small child with tangled blonde hair, clutching a backpack as if it contained her whole world. For a long moment, he just watched her. There was something in the way she stood, too still, too old for her size, that made him forget where he was. He knew that look. He had worn it himself when he stood over two coffins and tried to remember how to breathe. Grief had a posture, and hers was unmistakable. He didn't think before stepping forward. He simply moved, drawn by instinct, by that strange pull that made him want to shield her from the sterile brightness of the terminal. When the clerk lifted the phone to call security, Ethan's voice came out before he had time to weigh the words. "Don't call them. I'll handle this." The clerk blinked, confused by the confidence in his tone, by the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed. Ethan crouched down so he could look the girl in the eye. "What's your name?" he asked, and when she said Lily, the sound of it caught somewhere deep in his chest. She showed him the paper with her aunt's name and the words by the sea written in uneven letters. He could almost see her mother helping her write it, perhaps the night before everything went wrong. He had once helped his son do the same, tracing shaky letters across a page, laughing when the pencil broke. The memory hit him like a wave he hadn't been ready for. The airline staff didn't know what to do. Rules demanded they call the authorities, but Ethan's calm precision made them hesitate. He spoke with the kind of certainty that made people assume he knew what he was doing. Within minutes, he had paid for the ticket and arranged to travel with her, promising to deliver her safely. It wasn't just a promise to them, it was a promise to himself, though he didn't fully understand why he needed to make it. As they waited near the gate, he found himself glancing at her again and again. She sat quietly, swinging her feet, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. He noticed that her shoes were slightly worn, the soles peeling. The sight made something ache in him, not pity, but an old tenderness he thought he had buried. He asked her if she was hungry, and she nodded. When he brought her a small sandwich and juice box, she said thank you with a politeness that sounded rehearsed, as if she'd learned it to survive among strangers. While she ate, he studied the terminal window, watching planes rise into the clouds, silver and distant. He remembered his wife's laughter on the morning they had first flown together, remembered how she had teased him for gripping the armrest too tightly. The same light filtered through the glass now, bright but cold. He wondered what she would say if she saw him here, a man who had sworn never to care again, suddenly protecting a lost child he didn't know. When the announcement for boarding came, Lily looked up at him as though she were asking permission. Her trust was silent but absolute, and it frightened him more than he cared to admit. He offered his hand, and after a brief pause, she took it. Her small fingers were cool and trembling, but her grip was steady. As they walked toward the gate, Ethan realized that something had shifted. For the first time in months, his steps had direction, his thoughts were not entirely his own. He didn't know what waited at the end of the journey, who the mysterious aunt was, or what story the child carried, but he knew one thing with unsettling clarity: he could not turn away. And though he told himself he was simply being responsible, deep down he understood that this moment, this strange meeting at the edge of a crowd, was not coincidence. It was the first flicker of something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Ethan spent most of the flight in silence, though his mind never stopped moving. Lily had fallen asleep within minutes of takeoff, her head resting against the window, the hum of the engine soothing her in a way that seemed almost merciful. Every few minutes, she stirred, clutching her pink backpack tighter, as if afraid it might disappear. He watched her without meaning to, caught between worry and something far more complicated. She was so small, so fragile in her stillness, and yet there was a quiet strength about her that unsettled him. It reminded him of the way children sometimes understand loss better than adults, not with words, but with the kind of acceptance that comes from having no other choice. The flight attendants had been kind but wary. When they realized Ethan had paid for the ticket and signed temporary custody papers for the trip, their suspicion faded into admiration. He was, after all, that Ethan Rivers, the man whose name appeared in the business pages and charity reports, the one people described as brilliant and untouchable. No one questioned his right to take charge. They saw a successful man helping a lost child and filled in the rest with comforting assumptions. But Ethan knew the truth, he wasn't doing this out of heroism. He was doing it because walking away felt impossible. Something about the girl's loneliness had anchored itself in him, pulling him toward a decision that logic couldn't explain. When the plane landed, the air outside the terminal was heavy with coastal rain. Lily rubbed her eyes, blinking at the gray sky that hung low over the small regional airport. Ethan took her hand without speaking and led her through the terminal, scanning the crowd for anyone who might be waiting. There was no one. The baggage claim area was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing above their heads. He crouched down so he could look her in the eyes. "Do you remember what your aunt looks like?" he asked softly. Lily shook her head. "Only her name. Aunt Mary. Mama said she lives by the sea, in a white house with a dog named Jasper." Ethan exhaled slowly. It wasn't much to go on, but it was something. He guided her toward a bench, took out his phone, and began searching. There were several towns along the coast, and more than one woman named Mary Collins in the area. Some were elderly, some married, one even listed as a teacher at a local school. He didn't know which, if any, was the right one. He called his assistant, giving instructions in the efficient, clipped tone of habit, though beneath it there was urgency. "Find me every address for a Mary Collins within 100 miles of the coastline. And get me a car." As they waited, Lily leaned against his arm, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. He hesitated before placing his hand lightly on her shoulder. The gesture felt unnatural at first, like stepping into someone else's memory. His son had fallen asleep like that once, small head pressed against his sleeve, the scent of crayons and sunlight on his hair. Ethan's throat tightened. He had promised himself he would never relive that kind of closeness, never open the part of him that still remembered how much it hurt to lose it. And yet here he was, unable to pull away from a child who barely knew his name. When the car arrived, he carried her gently, though she woke halfway through the motion. "Where are we going?" she murmured. "To find your aunt," he answered. "Do you know her phone number?" She shook her head, half asleep again, whispering, "Mama said she would know when I came." Her words sent a chill through him, not because they were strange, but because they were spoken with absolute faith, as if she truly believed that somewhere, someone was waiting for her. The drive stretched along winding coastal roads, the ocean visible through breaks in the cliffs. The rain came and went in steady waves, drumming softly on the roof of the car. Lily stayed awake now, watching the world blur past the window. "Do you miss your family?" she asked suddenly, turning toward him. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Yes," he said finally. "Every day." She nodded, as if she understood more than she should have. "Mama says when people go to heaven, they still listen. You just have to talk to them in your heart." Her innocence cut through him with quiet precision. For the rest of the drive, neither of them spoke. He focused on the road, on the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers, on the thin silver line of the horizon that seemed to stretch forever. Somewhere along that road, he realized he had crossed an invisible boundary. He was no longer a stranger doing a favor for a lost child. He had become something else, a protector, a witness, perhaps even a man trying to atone for the life he had left behind. By the time the car turned onto the narrow path leading toward the ocean, the clouds had begun to break apart. The sea appeared at last, wide, endless, alive, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He didn't know what he was driving toward or how this story would end, but he could no longer pretend it was just chance that had brought them together. It felt, in some quiet, unexplainable way, like destiny beginning to breathe. The road stretched for miles, a ribbon of wet asphalt winding between the cliffs and the sea. The car hummed steadily beneath the rain, the windshield wipers sweeping rhythmically, their sound mingling with the muted roar of the ocean beyond the rocks. Lily sat in the back seat, pressed against the window, watching waves crash into gray stone, her reflection flickering faintly in the glass. She hadn't spoken much since they left the airport. Every now and then, she would open her backpack, check that the folded photograph was still there, and then close it again with the care of someone guarding a treasure. Ethan glanced at her through the rearview mirror from time to time, uncertain whether to ask questions or leave her to the quiet she seemed to need. He drove without a destination more precise than the words she had given him: a white house by the sea, a dog named Jasper, an aunt named Mary. Each new coastal town looked both promising and wrong, too new, too far from whatever image her mother had planted in the girl's mind. The GPS signaled another turn, another road leading toward the cliffs. The rain had begun to ease, breaking into soft mist, and the horizon lightened to the pale color of silver. Lily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She used to sing when it rained, she said, still looking out the window. My mom. She said it made the world sound softer. Ethan didn't answer at first. He wanted to, but the words caught in his throat. He had forgotten what softness felt like. She sounds like someone who loved you very much, he said finally. Lily nodded. She did. She said even if she went away, she'd still be around when it rained. That's why I like the sound. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. There was something almost unbearable about the way children could hold on to faith after loss, how they filled silence with imagination rather than despair. It made his own emptiness feel heavier, as though he had betrayed something sacred. He thought of the mornings when he had sat in his penthouse, the city stretching out below him, everything he had ever wanted within reach and yet nothing left that mattered. He had built a life on control and precision, but grief had stripped it down to the raw truth: none of it could be held, not money, not power, not love. And here was this child beside him, surviving on hope alone, and somehow she seemed stronger than he ever had. After several hours, the road narrowed into a dirt lane flanked by overgrown grass. Ethan slowed the car, unsure if it led anywhere at all. The scent of salt filled the air as the ocean grew louder, and then, at last, he saw it, a small house perched on a rise above the cliffs, its paint faded to a soft, uneven white, shutters trembling in the wind. A dog barked from somewhere nearby, deep and cautious, and Lily sat upright, eyes wide. That's Jasper, she said with sudden certainty. Mama showed me a picture. That's him. Ethan parked at the foot of the path and turned off the engine. The quiet that followed felt heavy, broken only by the distant call of gulls. They stepped out of the car, the air cool and sharp with the smell of seaweed and rain. Lily clutched his hand, her fingers small and cold, but her grip was firm. As they walked toward the house, a woman appeared at the doorway, mid-40s, perhaps, her dark hair streaked with gray, her expression torn between suspicion and disbelief. She wore a heavy sweater and carried herself with the weariness of someone who had learned to expect bad news. For a long second, she simply stared, her eyes fixed on the little girl. Then her hand flew to her mouth. "Lily," she whispered, the word trembling out of her like a prayer. Lily froze, her face crumpling in confusion and relief all at once, and then she ran forward, straight into the woman's arms. Ethan stood back, watching as the two clung to each other, the sound of the ocean swallowing whatever words they tried to speak. It was not his moment to intrude upon, but even from a distance, he could feel the rawness of it, the ache of reunion tangled with the shadows of everything that had been lost. After a while, the woman looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears and a trace of weariness. "You brought her here?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "She found me at the airport. Said she was looking for you." The woman pressed her lips together, as if holding back more questions than she dared to ask. "You have no idea what this means," she said finally. I thought I'd never see her again." They went inside the house, the dog following closely, tail wagging hesitantly as if sensing both joy and tension. The interior was small but warm, filled with the scent of wood and sea air. Photographs lined the mantel, most of them old, a young woman with a bright smile, a child in her arms, the same blonde hair, the same blue eyes. Lily stared at them in silence, her fingers brushing over the glass frames. "That's Mama," she said softly. "And that's here. She told me I'd find you." The woman's eyes filled again, and she pulled Lily close, murmuring something Ethan couldn't hear. For the first time that day, Ethan felt himself exhale. He had done what he promised, he had brought the girl to safety. Yet as he looked around the small house, as he listened to the waves crash against the cliffs outside, he realized that what had begun as a moment of chance now felt like something larger, a thread that connected him to this broken family in a way he couldn't easily untangle. He should have felt relief, but what came instead was a quiet unease, the sense that the story was not yet finished. Something about the woman's guarded look, the way her hands trembled when she said Lily's name, told him there was more beneath the surface. And though he could have left then, returned to his car and the ordered life waiting for him in the city, he didn't move. The sun began to set behind the horizon, casting a pale glow across the ocean. Lily sat curled up on the warm couch, her head resting against her aunt's shoulder, finally safe, finally still. Ethan stood near the window, staring out at the sea, feeling its pull, vast and endless. Somewhere deep inside him, something stirred, a fragile sense of purpose, the faint echo of a promise he didn't yet know he was making. The tide rolled in, steady and relentless, as if reminding him that even broken things could find their way back to shore. The days that followed passed in a strange, suspended rhythm, as if time itself had slowed to match the quiet breath of the sea. The house on the cliff felt both welcoming and fragile, filled with the echo of things unspoken. Ethan stayed longer than he had intended. At first, it was to make sure that Lily was truly safe, that this woman who claimed to be her aunt could care for her properly. But each time he told himself he would leave in the morning, something, the wind off the water, the child's laughter, the haunted look that crossed Mary's face when she thought no one was watching, kept him there a little longer. Mary Collins was not at all what he had expected. There was nothing polished or practiced about her. Her clothes were simple, her hands rough from work, but she carried herself with a certain quiet dignity. The house had clearly seen better years, yet it was alive in a way Ethan's city apartment had never been. There were plants growing on the windowsills, shells collected in glass jars, and photographs tucked into every corner, though some had been turned face down. It took him a while to notice that. The woman smiled when she spoke to Lily but seemed to flinch from her own memories. Lily, for her part, adjusted with the strange resilience only children possess. She followed Mary around the house, asking endless questions about the garden, the dog, the sea, and what it was like to live so close to the edge of the world. At night, she slept deeply, as if her dreams had finally found a place to rest. But Ethan could sense that beneath her calmness there was still fear, the kind that hides behind quiet eyes. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and come downstairs, standing by the window, looking out toward the horizon as if expecting someone to appear. Ethan began helping with small repairs around the house, more to keep busy than anything else. He fixed a loose hinge, repainted the porch railing, replaced a section of the fence that had fallen during the last storm. Mary tried to protest at first, saying she couldn't let a guest do such things, but he brushed it off easily. Work steadied him, it gave his restless mind something to hold on to. Yet every hammer strike or brush stroke drew him deeper into the quiet mystery of the place. He would catch fragments of whispered conversations between Mary and the girl, things about Lily's mother, about promises made and broken, about a past too heavy for a child to carry. One evening, as the sun melted into the sea, painting the water with fire, Ethan found Mary sitting on the steps of the porch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She looked exhausted, not in body but in spirit, as if every breath cost her something. He joined her without a word, watching the horizon stretch endlessly before them. After a long silence, she spoke. "You must think I'm a terrible person," she said quietly. "Not even at the airport. Not on the phone. I didn't know she was coming. I didn't even know she was alive." Ethan turned toward her. "What do you mean?" Mary stared at her hands. "Her mother, my sister, we hadn't spoken in years. Not because we fought, but because she disappeared. One day she just left, no goodbye, no forwarding address. She sent one letter a few months later, saying she was fine, that she had to protect her daughter, and that she'd reach out again when it was safe. Then nothing. I tried to find her, but she'd erased herself completely. The only thing I knew was that she was afraid of someone. I never knew who." Ethan's chest tightened. "Afraid of what?" Mary shook her head slowly. "I wish I knew. But she wasn't the kind of woman to scare easily. If she ran, she had a reason." She looked up at him then, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "When Lily showed up on my doorstep, it was like seeing a ghost. She looks exactly like her mother did at that age. And if she came all this way alone, it means something terrible must have happened." Ethan felt the words sink deep inside him. The air grew colder as the last of the sunlight slipped away. Somewhere in the distance, a wave broke against the rocks, the sound sharp and final. "She didn't have anyone else," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "She said her mother was gone." Mary nodded, her voice trembling now. "Then it's true." She set the cup down and buried her face in her hands. "I don't even know how to tell her. She's so young. She shouldn't have to understand death yet." For a while they sat in silence, the only sound the low, steady rhythm of the ocean. Ethan wanted to comfort her, to say that the girl would be all right, that she was safe now, but the words felt empty in his mouth. He had seen too much to believe in easy reassurances. Instead, he looked toward the darkening sky and thought about the woman he had never met, the sister who had vanished, the mother who had trusted fate to carry her child to safety. Something about the story didn't add up. A disappearance, a warning, a child sent alone, it all pointed to a secret still buried somewhere. That night, as he lay in the small guest room at the end of the hall, Ethan couldn't sleep. The house creaked softly in the wind, and he could hear the distant crash of the waves below the cliff. He thought of Lily, of how she had looked when she spoke about heaven, so certain and unafraid. He thought of Mary's shaking hands, of the fear she still carried, and of the strange pull that had brought him here. He had come to return a lost child to her family, but the more he saw, the more he suspected that this was only the beginning of something far larger, something that reached back into the shadows of his own past. The moonlight spilled across the floor, cold and silver, illuminating the edges of the worn furniture. On the table beside the bed sat Lily's pink backpack, left there earlier after she had fallen asleep on the couch. Ethan stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of a decision forming quietly inside him. Whatever had happened to the girl's mother, whatever she had been running from, he needed to know. And though he didn't yet understand why, he realized with absolute clarity that he would not leave until he found out. It was near midnight when Ethan finally gave in to the pull that had been whispering at him all evening. The house was asleep, the air filled with the low, rhythmic sound of waves slamming against the cliffs below. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dim light, staring at the pink backpack that rested beside the nightstand. He knew he shouldn't touch it. It was the one thing that still belonged entirely to Lily, the last tangible link to the mother she had lost. But something in the way Mary had spoken earlier, that trembling fear she could not name, made him feel that whatever truth was hidden inside that bag might be the key to everything. After a long hesitation, he reached for it and gently pulled the zipper open. Inside were the ordinary belongings of a child, a small hairbrush tangled with blonde strands, a pack of crayons worn down to stubs, a folded paper airplane, a piece of string with a shell tied at one end. He lifted each object carefully, as though afraid to disturb its fragile meaning. Then, tucked into the back pocket, he found a sealed envelope. The paper was creased and smudged, the edges damp as if someone had held it too long before deciding to let it go. On the front, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "To the one who is not afraid of the truth." Ethan felt a strange chill pass through him. The message was addressed to no one in particular, yet it seemed to look straight at him. He unfolded the flap slowly, half expecting it to fall apart in his hands, and drew out a letter written in neat but hurried lines. The ink had bled slightly in places, as if tears or rain had touched it. He began to read. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. My name is Anna Collins, and my daughter's name is Lily. She is everything I ever had and everything I ever wanted to protect. For months, I have known that my life was not safe. I married a man I thought I understood, but the truth about him is darker than I ever imagined. He is not simply unkind, he is dangerous. His name is Richard Collins. He is powerful, wealthy, and ruthless, and the image he shows the world is a lie. He runs charitable foundations that do not exist, companies that launder money, organizations that destroy anyone who tries to expose them. I discovered more than I was supposed to. I tried to walk away, but he would never allow it. I have been followed, watched, threatened. I am writing this so that if I disappear, someone will know the truth. Someone will know that he must be stopped. Please, whoever finds this, protect my daughter. She deserves a life untouched by the evil her father created." Ethan's hands were trembling by the time he finished. He read the letter twice, then a third time, each word carving deeper into him. Richard Collins. The name struck him like a physical blow. He knew it, far too well. The man had been one of his closest business partners 5 years earlier, a polished executive who had built a reputation for generosity and charm. Ethan had invested in several of his ventures before their paths diverged, never suspecting that beneath the smooth exterior there might be rot. Now, staring at the trembling lines on the paper, he realized that his own money might have unknowingly fueled the very network this woman had been trying to escape. He leaned back in the chair, the letter clutched in his hand, the ocean's voice roaring through the window. The guilt hit him in waves, the deals signed without questions, the friendships maintained out of convenience, the willful blindness that came with privilege. He had thought himself a good man once, a man who built and donated and smiled for the cameras, but now he could feel the foundation of that image cracking beneath him. This wasn't just about Lily's mother anymore. This was about him, about the kind of world he had helped sustain simply by looking away. The next morning, he sat across from Mary at the kitchen table, the letter lying between them. She read it silently, her face tightening as she went on. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes filled with both fury and disbelief. "I knew she was scared," she whispered. "But I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't know she was running from him." She pushed the letter toward Ethan. "You said you knew this man." Ethan hesitated. "I knew of him. We worked together once. He's clever, manipulative. The kind of man who builds an empire on other people's ignorance. I thought he was just another businessman playing dirty with numbers, but this is something else. Mary's hands were shaking. If he finds out Lily is alive. He won't, Ethan interrupted quickly, his voice sharper than he intended. Not if I can stop him. But if what this letter says is true, then she may already be in danger. If her mother had evidence, if she exposed something he wanted to hide, he'll be looking for it. Mary's fear deepened, her gaze flicking to the stairs where Lily was still sleeping. Do you think he knows she's here? I don't know, Ethan said quietly. But if he doesn't now, he will soon. He'll have people checking flights, contacts, police reports. He has resources I've seen firsthand. The only advantage we have is time. They fell into silence, the weight of the truth pressing between them. Ethan picked up the letter again, reading the last line over and over, the plea that seemed to reach out through time and loss. Protect my daughter. It was not a request, it was a command written in desperation. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. I need to make a few calls, he said. There are still people in the city who owe me favors, and some who hate Richard Collins enough to help. But this can't go through the usual channels. If he's as powerful as your sister believed, he'll have eyes everywhere. Mary nodded slowly, her voice almost breaking. You'll help us then? Ethan looked at her, the memory of his own family flashing before his eyes, the empty house, the silence that had followed the sirens that night, the endless guilt of survival. I couldn't help the people I lost, he said softly. But I can help her. That night, when Lily came down for dinner, she noticed the tension that hung in the room but didn't ask about it. She talked about the dog, about the shells she'd found near the rocks, about the sound of the sea that reminded her of her mother's voice. Ethan smiled and listened, hiding the storm that brewed behind his calm expression. He knew what he had to do now, even if it meant reopening every door he had once closed to protect himself. The truth had a way of finding the people strong enough to face it, and for the first time in years, he was ready to listen. When Lily went to bed, Ethan stood by the window, staring out into the darkness where the sea met the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the horizon, a dangerous man still believed he could bury what he'd done. But Ethan Rivers had lived too long in the comfort of silence. He had been blind once. He would not be again. And though the storm gathering in his mind was full of risk and uncertainty, he felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind that comes only when a man finally decides to do what is right, no matter the cost. Ethan's decision to act marked the beginning of a different kind of war, one not fought with weapons, but with secrets, money, and truth. For years he had lived in the upper echelons of power, a place where morality bent easily under the weight of influence. Now he found himself turning those same tools against a man who had once stood beside him at boardroom tables and charity galas. Richard Collins had built his empire on manipulation and fear, constructing layers of companies and foundations that hid criminal networks beneath a facade of benevolence. Ethan had once admired his ruthlessness. Now he was determined to dismantle it piece by piece. The days that followed were a blur of quiet urgency. Ethan spent long hours in Mary's small study, surrounded by papers, his laptop glowing in the dim light. He called old contacts, journalists, private investigators, lawyers who still owed him favors from the years when his influence had seemed untouchable. He spoke carefully, never revealing names until he had to. Each conversation brought a small piece of the puzzle, and slowly, a picture began to form. Offshore accounts, shell companies registered under fictitious charities, payments funneled through medical research funds, every connection pointed back to the same man. It was a labyrinth of corruption, but one that Ethan knew how to navigate because he had once walked its edges. Mary watched him from a distance, torn between gratitude and unease. She could see the change in him, the way his old composure had hardened into something almost fierce. It was as if he had rediscovered a version of himself he had long buried, not the polished philanthropist, but the strategist who understood how to move quietly through the dark. At night, when the house was still, she would find him staring out at the ocean, the light of his phone reflected in his tired eyes. He didn't tell her everything, but she sensed that what he was uncovering went far beyond one woman's death. It reached into a world where money washed away guilt and justice came only to those willing to destroy themselves to find it. Lily, too young to grasp the danger surrounding her, continued to bring life into the house. She filled the rooms with laughter and questions, her drawings taped to the walls, her voice drifting through the halls like music. Ethan often paused his work just to listen to her talk to the dog, her words soft and earnest. Each sound reminded him of what he was fighting for, of the innocence that still existed despite the world's cruelty. Yet sometimes, when she caught him staring into space, she would ask, "Are you thinking about my mom?" And he would answer honestly, "Yes, I am," though what he meant was far more complicated. One afternoon, as rain lashed the windows and the wind howled against the cliffs, Ethan received the call that would change everything. The investigator he had hired, a man who had once worked for Collins but left after discovering too much, spoke quickly and quietly. "You were right," the man said. "The evidence is real. I found encrypted files on the Foundation's servers, records of illegal transfers, bribes, money tied to human trafficking and medical scams. It's worse than we thought. But he knows someone's looking. One of his people has been asking questions about you." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "How much does he know?" "Enough to be dangerous," the man replied. "He'll come for you before this becomes public. You don't have much time." After hanging up, Ethan stood motionless for several minutes, the storm outside matching the one inside his chest. He had expected retaliation, but hearing it spoken aloud forced him to confront the cost. He could disappear again, hide behind his wealth and lawyers, or he could finish what he started. He thought of Lily sleeping upstairs, of the letter her mother had written in desperation, of the promise he had made to protect her. The choice was no longer his, it had already been made the moment he opened that envelope. The next days unfolded in relentless tension. Ethan sent the collected evidence to multiple sources, trusted journalists, government investigators, and 2 friends who specialized in financial crime. He ensured that if something happened to him, the truth would still surface. Each night he double-checked locks, scanned the empty road beyond the gate, and moved Lily's bed farther from the window. Mary noticed but said nothing. Her silence was an act of faith. Then, one evening, headlights appeared at the bottom of the hill. The car didn't move for several minutes, just idled in the darkness. Ethan watched from the porch, the ocean wind tugging at his coat. When he finally stepped down the path, the car pulled away, its tires skidding on gravel. It might have been nothing, a lost traveler, a curious neighbor, but deep down he knew better. Collins's reach was long, and his patience was short. The walls were closing in. 2 nights later, the news broke. A major newspaper released an exposé on the Collins Foundation, complete with documents, bank records, and testimonies from former employees. The headline spread like wildfire, tearing through social media and television networks within hours. Ethan sat in the living room, the glow of the screen casting his face in pale light as he watched the story unravel. Arrest warrants were issued. Accounts were frozen. Richard Collins's image appeared on every channel, his confident smile replaced by something hollow and frightened as reporters crowded outside his mansion. Mary entered the room, her hand trembling. "It's over," she whispered. "You did it." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. It's not over. But it started." For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace, not triumph, not relief, but a quiet certainty that he had done what needed to be done. Yet beneath that calm lay exhaustion, the kind that comes after fighting ghosts for too long. When Lily came running in, asking why everyone on TV looked so serious, he turned off the screen and knelt down to her level. "It's just people learning the truth," he said. And sometimes the truth takes time to understand. She smiled and placed her small hand against his cheek. Then Mom can rest now, she said simply. Her words broke something open inside him. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her as tightly as he dared, the smell of rain and salt and childhood clinging to her hair. In that moment, he realized that redemption was never about erasing the past but about standing in it and choosing to be better. The man he had been, the man who once built walls of success to hide his grief, was gone. In his place stood someone raw and human, a man who had finally remembered how to feel. Outside, the sea roared against the cliffs, endless and alive. The wind tore through the trees, carrying away the last traces of the storm. Ethan looked through the window, watching the first pale light of dawn rise over the water, and thought that maybe, just maybe, he had begun to find his way back to life. 2 years later, the White House on the cliff had changed, though not in the way that comes from new paint or furniture. It had changed in spirit, in the warmth that lived inside its walls and the laughter that had replaced silence. The garden had grown wild again, filled with rosemary and small yellow flowers that spilled over the fence. The ocean below remained the same, endless, patient, and sometimes cruel, but now it sounded less like a warning and more like a song. Ethan had stayed. What was meant to be a temporary act of protection had quietly turned into something permanent, something like home. Lily had grown taller, her blonde hair longer, her voice stronger. She was no longer the frightened child he had found at the airport, but a bright, curious girl who ran barefoot through the grass and collected seashells as if each one carried a story. She had learned to laugh without hesitation, to dream again, to speak of her mother not with tears but with pride. Sometimes she would stand on the porch, facing the sea, and whisper into the wind. "Hi, Mom," she would say softly. "We're okay." Mary would listen from the kitchen, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. Ethan had built a small office near the back of the house, though it looked nothing like the glass towers he once ruled. He had left the world of high finance behind, selling most of his shares and donating the proceeds to the victims affected by Collins's schemes. What remained of his fortune he poured into something new, a foundation named after Lily's mother, the Anna Hope Trust, dedicated to helping women and children escape abusive homes and rebuild their lives. It became his life's work, not a symbol of power but of atonement. People called him selfless, a savior, but he never accepted the title. Redemption, he often said, is not something you earn, it's something you live through every day. The mornings were his favorite. The light spilled through the windows, painting the wooden floors with gold, and the scent of coffee and salt filled the air. Lily would appear in the doorway with her notebook and her pink backpack, still faded but now covered in drawings. She liked to write stories, about angels who lived in the sea, about brave girls who found their way home, and sometimes about men who had forgotten how to smile until someone reminded them how. Ethan would read them quietly, pretending not to be moved, though she always saw through him. Sometimes, when the sky turned orange at dusk, the three of them, Ethan, Mary, and Lily, would sit on the porch watching the sun fall into the water. It had become a ritual, a silent acknowledgement that they had survived what tried to destroy them. Mary had found peace too, though the shadows of the past never left completely. She still wrote to people connected to her sister, trying to piece together memories that time had scattered. She once told Ethan that forgiveness was not about forgetting but about deciding not to let pain be the only story that remained. He understood her better now than he ever could have before. One evening, as a gentle wind carried the smell of the sea into the house, Lily came running toward Ethan, holding a folded letter. "I wrote something for you," she said, handing it to him with a shy smile. He unfolded the paper carefully, expecting another story, but found instead a few uneven lines written in her careful hand. "Dear Ethan, thank you for finding me. Thank you for not walking away. Mom says in my dreams that you're her promise kept. She says she can rest now because you kept your word. I think you were meant to find me, even before the airport. Maybe you and I were both lost, and we found home at the same time. Love, Lily. The words blurred as he read them. He didn't cry, he had forgotten how to, but something inside him loosened, something that had been clenched for years. He folded the paper and placed it in his pocket, his heart heavy and full at once. "You're right," he said quietly. "We were both lost." Lily smiled, that same radiant smile her mother had in the photographs, and hugged him tightly before running outside again, the wind tugging at her hair. As darkness settled over the ocean, Ethan stepped onto the porch. The stars were just beginning to appear, scattered across the sky like distant lights from another world. The moon reflected on the water, turning it to silver. Behind him, laughter drifted from inside the house, Mary's voice scolding the dog, Lily's bright giggle echoing after her. He closed his eyes, listening, letting the sound wrap around him. For so long, he had lived among ghosts, haunted by what he had lost and what he had failed to do. Now, for the first time, he felt alive in the present, anchored by love that asked for nothing in return. He looked out at the horizon, imagining the woman he had never met but who had changed the course of his life. "She's safe," he whispered into the wind. "I promise." The sea responded with a long, steady breath, as if carrying the message to wherever it needed to go. The world was still imperfect, still filled with loss and injustice, but within the walls of that small house by the cliffs, there was peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks when tested, but the kind born from survival, the peace that comes when pain finally finds its meaning. As the night deepened, Ethan sat down in the old wooden chair, the same one where he had once watched the ocean in silence. Now he watched it with a sense of belonging. Lily's laughter floated through the open window, mingling with the steady rhythm of the waves, and he thought that perhaps heaven was not only above but also here, in the sound of a child's joy, in the warmth of a home rebuilt from sorrow, and in the quiet certainty that love, when found against all odds, is enough to heal what was once broken.